to order. It is 8:31 a.m. on Tuesday, August 21st. Welcome to City Council meeting. We will start off with the legislative prayer. Tom, would you please lead us?
Gracious and Heavenly Father, we gather this morning in your holy name. We appreciate the fact that you allowed us to collectively assemble to try to make worldly and wise decisions that will affect people within our city and within our county, and we try to make those to the best of the ability that you have granted us. In the book of Isaiah, you asked who to send, and we have gladly taken that challenge and said, send us. And we hope that you understand we try to do these things with the best of our ability. We pray for our world and our nation. We pray for those that don't have the ability to assemble and speak as we do. We pray for our county and city. We pray for all those people within our boundaries that we help and we try to assist. But most of all, we pray and we thank you for your son, Jesus. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We have the Bandits football team here today to lead us in our pledges. Would you please come forward? You want to come right on over here? We're going to turn this way because our flag is right here, and then the Texas flag is right over here. So you ready?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. Pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state,
Under God, one and indivisible. You want to turn around and introduce yourself? You want to start with your name? This morning, our proclamation of August 30th, 2018 as West Texas RSVP Volunteer Recognition Day. Do I have anyone from RSVP? Terrific. The 37th Annual West Texas RSVP Volunteer Recognition Event provides the opportunity to celebrate and count the ways volunteer service makes a difference in our communities. Volunteers who serve through West Texas RSVP take part in activities that enrich their physical, mental, and emotional well-being. The 2018 Older Americans theme, Engage at Every Age, reflects that now, more than ever before, older adults are offering their wisdom and experience. West Texas RSVP enriches the lives of individuals of every age by promoting home and community-based services that support independent living, involving older adults in community planning events and other activities, and providing opportunities for older adults to work, volunteer, learn, lead, and mentor. Therefore, I, Brenda Gunter, Mayor of the City of San Angelo, Texas, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim August 30th, 2018 as RSVP Volunteer Recognition Day in the Concho Valley, focusing on volunteer engagement, recognition, inspiration, and countless acts of service to others.
Members, this is the 37th year that we're honoring RSVP volunteers for their service to the community, and this past year we had 431 volunteers that gave over 73,000 hours of service at over 40 plus nonprofits across the Concho Valley. And we're really excited because one of the nonprofits we nominated for the Governor's Awards won, Russ Street Ministries, and for the second year in a row, West Texas RSVP won the National Service Governor's Award for the second year in a row, plus the third year out of 6 years. So we're real pleased at the impact they have in the community. And we'll be honoring each volunteer, but we'll also be honoring volunteers who have a lot of hours at specific agencies. So they do a great job in the community, and we're going to ask agencies, because we're talking about counting the ways volunteers make a difference, we're going to be asking agencies to talk to the volunteers and tell them the impact that they make at their agencies. So thank you.
We will now open the meeting with public comment. I did not mention it earlier, but please check to make sure your cell phones are turned off. And I also want to announce that at the last City Council meeting, we said that today we would discuss the 3 districts, the River Corridor, the Downtown, and the Cultural Affairs District. We are not going to have that on the agenda today. It will be on a future agenda, and we will let you know when that is. Any further public comment?
Morning, Council. Lance Overstreet, Assistant Director, Water Utilities. Just basically making a public comment, letting everyone know that we did have a credit card security type breach this last Friday that affected the water billing system. That system is still currently down. We are not accepting any credit card payments except through the 657-4323 automatic pay. And we will be actually bringing updates to the public and to council as we receive more information.
What happens to the individuals who have to pay and using their credit card for their water bill because they might be short of cash, whatever? How do we handle that?
They can actually call the automated number, that 657-4323. That is an automated phone service that is completely separate system from the one that had the breach. And right now we are currently in the process of rebuilding a server to get our credit card system back online. They had that operational yesterday, ran a few tests, and there's a couple more glitches that they are trying to actually remedy prior to bringing that back up online.
Are we going to do a crawl, on the news at night or during the day that says, if you need to pay by credit card, call this number? Because I'm nervous people aren't watching this. I'm nervous they didn't get I'm just nervous people are not aware of what's really going on.
If you actually log into the Click2Gov and through the city system, there are notices on that system as you progress through it that the system is down and utilize that number. So
if I don't have a computer, what do I do?
If you don't have a computer and you wouldn't be using your credit card unless you're already calling the number.
Okay. So we've covered all the issues in terms of making sure customers don't get water turned off or negative phone calls or any customer service issues, correct?
Absolutely. And even if you come into the annex and need to pay with credit card in the annex through the water billing system, we are actually making the phones available for them to actually do it right then and there. So,
thank you. Thanks, Lance.
Thank you.
Do I have further public comment?
Mayor, Council, Steve Hampton. I would like to see some evaluation of how we could wean the city from the grid and make us
Which grid are you talking about?
the electrical grid, where we could go into a lot of the budget expenses that we have, I think, come from electrical costs. I know we probably have some kind of a deal, but I don't have the particulars on it. Some education could be had about that, and how we could use the gas out at the dump for our advantage, and then maybe producing electrical for the land.
We're already in the process of looking at methane gas from the dump.
Methane gas, okay. And not original ideas, and just never have come to boil to the top and really been evaluated.
It's boiling.
Oh, it's boiling. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Yes, Lucy, please.
I just wanted to make, is anyone here from Streets and Bridges? Because I had been getting questions from the constituents wanting to know about the seal coating project that is supposed to begin in College Hills and Pauline Edition. So I don't know if it's supposed to start this week or next week. Thank you.
Hi, Lucy. In regards to the seal coating program.
And you're who?
I'm Russell Pale, the city engineer for the city of San
Thank you.
Angelo. And I'm here to talk about the seal coating program. So they were scheduled to be here next week, but due to the rains that we had last weekend, that they had rains where they were currently stationed at now, the contractor, they've been pushed back to the first week of September. So they will be here the first week of September. They're scheduled to have or they're anticipating to have the work done in 2 weeks once they're here. But the street, they'll have the seal coat actually down, but the street sweeping will actually take a little bit longer than that to follow up behind them to clean up.
Can I ask about the street sweeping? This is just a comment that I was getting ready to go to Houston Hart on Friday or Saturday, and there was a sweeper at the corner of, I guess, 7th and 306.
Okay.
And he was doing some amazing tricks there on that side street, that frontage road, including backing up into the turn thing. I will tell you, it was pretty dangerous looking to see what happened, because if somebody exited off of off the loop and came around, he would have.
Right.
We need
Did it
to
have a city logo
have an
on the
education.
side?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Or I think it did.
Okay, right, because if it's on the frontage road, that's actually TxDOT right of way, and that would be their street sweepers.
We need to have that conversation with them, because what was happening was not safe at any level.
Bet.
City logo and a picture of Russell right there on the side.
Yeah, driving it, I'm pretty good at that.
In his,
Russell.
in his lime green tie.
In his lime green tie.
Yeah.
Russell, before you go, are we up to speed, ahead of the curve with potholes in the areas?
I do know that Street and Bridge is working on that currently, and as far as I know, they are ahead of the curve working on that. So,
Thank you. Any further comments from council other than the laughter and jokes going on the left side here?
It's Tom.
Hebert.
It's Tom.
Hebert.
Okay. Any other further public comment today? With no further public comment, we will move into the consent agenda. Does anyone want to pull anything from the consent agenda? Tommy?
No, ma'am.
Tom?
No, ma'am.
Harry?
No.
Lucy?
No, ma'am.
Lane? Billy?
No, ma'am.
With no items being pulled from the consent agenda, may I have a motion to approve consent agenda?
So moved.
And there is a second. Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes 7-0. We will now move into the regular agenda, starting with item A, presentation of annual actuarial analysis regarding the risk fund. And we have Jason Martin here, right?
Well, actually, ma'am, I'm Charles Hagan. Good morning, Mayor, Council.
Charles, you're not on here.
Well, I'm going to introduce Jason.
Okay.
So we're going to go forward. You should have received a book like this that covers the actuarial report that we're going to discuss this morning. It's nothing more than an informational brief to help you with your funding process or budget process for funding the self-insurance fund. So Towers Watson and Willis performs our actuarial work, and Jason Martin is the presenter, and he will present you his findings.
You want to talk about what actuarial is? Because since it's hard to pronounce, it's probably hard to understand.
Yes, ma'am. They take our past history, they run a bunch of series of tests and analysis, and they come up and they find where we should be or how much funding we should acquire to maintain the self-insurance fund going forward. So they break down each one of our accounts, such as workers' comp, property, auto, and general liability. And then they come up with a figure for us that we should work with or work towards having as part of our funding process for a self-insurance fund.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here
to present the findings from the September 30th, 2017 actuarial report.
You're Jason?
Yes, I am
Okay.
Jason Martin with Willis Towers Watson. Get the slides advanced. So before we get started, this is just reminding that this presentation and the actual report itself is really intended for the city itself and for making any decisions in terms of what you would like to
Can you
put
move the
in place for your
microphone up?
funding.
I'm afraid people in the audience can't hear.
Is this better?
It is.
Is that better? Okay, great. Thank you. So the findings from this study are really intended for the internal use of the city. Any judgments about it, we'd ask that you'd make any decisions based on the full report itself as opposed to just this summary. As we get into the table of contents itself, we're going to be talking a little bit about your current self-insurance program and then get into some of the objectives of the actual report, and then we'll get into the findings as well. So why do you have an actuarial report? Well, the city has a self-insurance program. When we talk about self-insurance, if you think about your own homeowner's policy or automobile policy, you have a deductible, let's say. So if you have a claim or if you're in an accident, you'll retain the first portion of that claim, which whatever is within your deductible. So if you have a $500 deductible, you'd retain the first $500 of that claim. The city is in much a similar situation. The only difference is that the retentions or the deductibles that the city has are much larger. So as we show on this table, for example, workers' compensation, the city's deductible or the retention is $650,000. So you retain the first $650,000 of every claim. For general liability, it's an unlimited. For law enforcement, public officials, you're retaining the first $500,000 of every claim. And then for property, it's between $10,000 or $25,000, depending on the incident surrounding the claim itself. So what the actual report is designed to do, and part of our objectives, are to help you understand how much money should you set aside so that you can pay those claims for workers' compensation or general liability, other claims that have happened, in this case, prior to September 30th of 2017. How much money should you set aside to cover those claims so that as they start to get paid out over time, you've set aside enough funding? The next piece that we're providing is a forecast. So in this case, for claims that happen between October 1st and September 30th of 2018, how much money should you set aside now so that you have the funding in place to cover those claims when they come due? So those are the two main objectives and the information that we're providing in our report. As we go through the findings, you'll see that we're providing both an unpaid estimate on an undiscounted basis as well as on a discounted basis. So the difference between those two is on a discounted basis is we're accounting for the time value of money. So we're reflecting the fact that some of these claims, especially for workers' compensation, you may not be done paying out on those claims for another 30 years. It can take a while for those claims to settle out. So this reflects that you set aside assets now, and as those assets are set aside, they get invested, and so you earn investment income. So it's saying that in order to pay $1 of projected liability tomorrow, you may only have to save 80 cents today to reflect that you're earning investment income over time before you actually make those payments. So we provide those estimates on both an undiscounted and a discounted basis. And the rate of return that we're using on that was provided by the city. It's about 1.25%, and that's based on an expected return on the assets that you do have invested. So as we get into the findings itself, the first is the unpaid loss estimate. In this case, in total, for column 1, the undiscounted amount, it's a total of about $3.4 million. That's comprised primarily of the workers' compensation liability. We're expecting that to be about $2.6 million. And then on a combined basis for the liability and property lines, it's about $786,000. For the forecasted year, so in this case, these are for claims between October 1st of 17 and September 30th of 2018, we have a total forecasted loss estimate about $1.8 million. Again, the majority of that is from workers' compensation. About $1.1 million is what we're projecting for claims that happened during that 12-month period. For the liability and for the property lines, it's about $688,000. What the city has set aside to cover those liabilities is 2 self-insurance funds. And so in this case, those funds, there's assets that are set aside to cover these liabilities. So when we provide these liability estimates, the city will true up those funds and look to see how much money should be set aside to cover those. What we provide in this slide here is a surplus estimate. So we're looking at, in this case, if you look in column 1, the city's self-insurance fund assets for workers' compensation is about $1.6 million. Our projected liability is the $2.4 million. So in this case, there's a surplus deficit. If you look for the liability and property, so in column 2.
Can I stop you just a minute, Jason?
Sure.
So the numbers we're looking at today are not actuals, they are the plan.
In this case, this is what was in place at September 30th of 2017. So the assets that were in place at that point in time, and then what our estimate of the liabilities were at that time. So this would have been at September 30th of 2017.
This isn't, we're 60 days away from ending this 2018. So the question mark is, this is the game plan, what's the actual, and you're going to present us with the actual based off of the plan, right?
These numbers are assets and expected future payments.
Yes,
And
I got that. I'm just interested in reality.
So these are the actual numbers at
Yes,
that
I
point
wanna
in
know.
time.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so the actual amount that we were expecting at September 30th, 2017 is the $2.4 million. That's what we expect to be paid in the future to cover claims that had happened through September 30th of 2017. And the funds that are set aside to cover those liabilities was $1.6 million for the workers' compensation. So that deficit is what we're reflecting here. For the property and for the liability line, though, there is a surplus in that case. So for the assets that are set aside for those coverages, it's at the $1.575 million. Our estimate of the liabilities at September 30th, 2017 is the $776,000. So there is a almost $800,000 surplus in this case for those coverages. So on a combined basis between the two, you're still up $3,000. In the bottom section, we're providing surplus ratios, which compare the amount of surplus you have in place to benchmark ratios. So the first one, the unpaid estimate relative to the surplus, the benchmark is anywhere less than a ratio of 3. Within that one, you're less than a 1 ratio, so you're within a reasonable range in terms of the amount of surplus you have set aside. Same for the loss forecast, where we're looking at the forecast we have for the upcoming year divided by that surplus, and in this case, you're also within a reasonable range. And finally, the last one is looking at the amount of surplus divided by the max retention. So for workers' compensation, that would be $650,000. For the general liability lines, it's at $500,000. And again, for liability and property, you're within a reasonable range of that surplus. If you think about the surplus and why you would have that, like why it's important to have the surplus, is there is inherent variability within these coverages. So we're basing our estimates on what we know at a particular time for the claims that have happened at that point. There could be a claim out there that has happened but hasn't been reported yet, or it could be you have a claim that you're expecting it to only cost about $50,000, and you maybe later find out that the person needs surgery, or they need to have surgery again, or they're not recovering as expected, and so you can have those additional costs that were unexpected. So the surplus is set aside to help with that inherent uncertainty within these coverages. To give you an idea of some of the variability around it, for workers' compensation, if you were to have just one additional claim at your retention limit, that would increase your unfunded or your liability here, in this case the $2.4 million, by about 27%. And then for the liability and property, if you were to have an additional $500,000 claim, it's over a 50% increase in what we were expecting to happen. So it's just understanding that there's some variability around these, just because there's uncertainty in terms of the claim experience themselves, in terms of the number of claims that could come in, how severe those claims are. And so that's one of the reasons for looking at the surplus and for having surplus in these funds, is to account for that uncertainty.
Mayor,
Yes, Billy?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Courtney.
I'll follow.
I'm just curious, Jason. I tried to look at this book and my eyes started to glaze over a little bit,
Right.
so I didn't get very far. But are you going to tell us somewhere in the presentation where we stand right now? Not the surplus, but what we have experienced in actual workers' compensation?
That's what I was asking for, Billy. I was
Well,
like,
that's what I
where's
kind of
reality
thought, and I
at?
thought, well,
This is
maybe
the
he
plan.
answered that and I didn't hear it.
Because we
so.
don't have, it doesn't say as of August 1 versus the plan. This is where we're at. This is the plan. Where's the actual?
this is based on audited and used in the audit figures for the last year end, so that you have some certainty associated with where we were at the beginning of this fiscal year. What we have experienced so far during this fiscal year would be contained in your blue books. And
Okay.
we would be
That's
glad
what I
to
wanted.
schedule a meeting with you to go over that page.
That's okay, as long
or
as we
those
know how
pages.
this ties into the Blue Book. That's
Yes,
the
ma'am.
question.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll be starting the next review here over the next few months for the next year-end review.
And is it to the city's advantage to be self-insured?
It is, yes. If you were to go out and buy commercial insurance at a much lower deductible, you'll end up paying more than what you would under a self-insurance program. Now, the trade-off is that you do buy some certainty. So we just talked about variability and what can happen if you have more claims or higher severity claims. So you're taking on more of that risk. But if you were look at your insurance program over a long term, you're better off by self-insuring than you are by paying commercial insurance at a much lower deductible.
Okay. Does council have questions? With no further questions, thank you, Jason. I'm assuming that's the end of the slides, right?
It is. Thank you.
Thank you. Item B, public hearing and first reading of an ordinance for case Z18-13, a rezoning from the general commercial, heavy commercial CGCH, and single-family residential RS1 zoning districts to the heavy commercial zoning district, or CH, being 2.053 acres located at 3014 Grape Creek Road. And John, you're on.
Thank you. John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. This is the property here. As you mentioned, the current zoning, and you'll see on the next map, it's partially CGCH and partially RS1 single family, and the rezoning is to the CH heavy commercial district. It is at the corner of Grape Creek Road and West 31st Street. You can see here that the future land use of the entire property is industrial. However, the zoning of the property splits the property sort of down the middle. So for years, this part of the property has been zoned CGCH, or heavy commercial, general commercial, and then the eastern part of the property was still part of the RS1 single-family neighborhood zoning district. And so this would bring all of the property into the heavy commercial district to allow for the uses that have been on the property for some time now. See here, looking back east, it is a neighborhood to the east and single-family homes. This is the home immediately adjacent to the property, and you can see the fenced area here of the property itself. So it is fenced and screened from that single-family residential home. This is the kind of activity that is occurring on the site. It is mostly caliche surface with outdoor storage of materials like the pipes you see there. As I mentioned, the future land use of the area is industrial, so the rezoning to heavy commercial is consistent with the comprehensive plan for the area. It does already comply with the heavy commercial standards, for example, the privacy fence that would be normally required where commercial abuts residential. The non-residential storage has been occurring on the property since 1996. At some point in the past, and we don't know when for sure, the storage encroached from the area that was already zoned for that into the residentially zoned part of the property. And this would clean that up to ensure that the use of the property is consistent with the zoning. We did send out our notifications, received 1 in favor and 3 in opposition. In fact, the property owner immediately adjacent there, this came up because of a complaint registered by that property owner. We began enforcement against Hirschfeld for storage on the residentially zoned property. And as typical, we offer options to a property owner who is under enforcement action like that. One of those options was seeking this rezoning, which is what they chose to do. Just a note about the 3 different oppositions, noise and dust and just the presence of outdoor storage near homes were the common complaints from all 3 of those in opposition. Staff does recommend approval, as did the Planning Commission unanimously back at their June meeting. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do I have questions from council? Billy?
You said that those that registered complaints in opposition was based on noise and dust. Is that noise from maybe the trucks delivering the pipe and unloading it, or what is the noise?
The complainants didn't mention that, and there may be people here to speak to that, some of the neighbors, but I would guess it's that kind of activity, trucks coming in and out, stirring up the dust of the caliche surface, loading and unloading of big, heavy metal kinds of materials. It probably makes some noise as well, but that's just speculation.
Are there any limits, time limits on that they can only do that from, say, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. or?
Yes, we do have a noise ordinance that would limit the noise of activities between certain hours. I want to say it's like 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., but I could double check that. But yes, so that activity shouldn't be happening in late hours or after folks' bedtimes in the neighborhood. Similarly with dust, dust is one of those hard things to regulate, but we do have standards that say if it's excessive, then we could take enforcement action as well.
John, this is probably a question you may not be able to answer, but the entire property is fenced. So why are we just now making a decision on whether to make all of that heavy commercial? Why did some stay residential and some stay in the other category?
Well, the short answer is we're not sure why the whole property wasn't zoned at the time. What I suspect in looking at this, you can see how this zoning line splits properties and this zoning line splits properties. Years ago, what often happened was in industrial corridors or commercial corridors, they simply took the main road and said, we're going to zone out 200 feet from that road. Or in this case, they might have said, let's zone everything 100 feet back from the road. And so what that resulted in was a lot of properties where the zoning splits it down the middle. And this was a situation, like I said, they've been doing this for over 20 years. But until we received the complaint, it wasn't something that just registered on our radar.
Were the homes there before? Because you had 3 people who complained. So my assumption is that those homeowners were there before this was general commercial, heavy commercial, or before it was industrial, I guess.
We're not 100% sure, but it appears from looking at old aerial photos that, yes, the homes would have been there before the industrial activity was occurring, particularly the industrial expansion onto that residentially zoned part of the property.
Do I have other questions or comments, Tom?
I think there's some constituents here, some tenants, and it'd be nice to hear from them before we move forward. I think there's some honest concerns that they have that I've been in touch with if
Okay.
Mr. Allen's here.
Please come forward and state your name.
Good morning, council members. My name's Randy Bennett, and I'm the one who lives right next door. I have been there since 1963. We were there long before Hirschfield Steel. I went to the Marine Corps and came back, and this has been next to me ever since. Y'all brought up the dust issue. Well, until they covered it with cliche, when the wind blew, you couldn't see the street. Now they've covered it with cliche. They've moved a lot of the junk out of the lot, and they put it right up against the fence. And it caused me considerable property damage to my house, my family's, myself. It's a giant lightning magnet. About 95% of the time the storm comes through, it gets hit. I lose windows, I lose electrical appliances, my dogs get hurt, I'm even getting harassed by their employees. I've had vermin thrown in my yard, I've had trash thrown in my yard. I'm not even gonna bring up the 55-gallon drum of oil that's been thrown over the fence in my yard. We have a problem. I am unable to tell you what happened between my father because I inherited the house from my father. I retired, I inherited the house, I moved in. Over the years, all I have ever asked Hirschfield Steel to do is please move the steel away from my house. Their response, they turned it to a junkyard, put it right up against the fence. That's all I've ever asked. That's all I want. get the steel away from my house. In regards to the lady's question about the dust, the man on the end of the street, he was painting his house. I feel sorry for him because it blew up a dust storm where you couldn't see the street. The reason the dust came up is they was moving steel in the yard, and every time he got a great big swath of paint on the side of his house, they'd do donuts in the lot and just make a giant dust storm which blew into his house. We have problems. I don't know how to resolve it. It's up to y'all some way. I'm asking y'all, please get them away out of our residential neighborhood. The only person that voted for approval is my neighbor behind me, and that's because one of his children works there. It's a blight in our neighborhood, I'm sorry. But I'm being harassed. There's willful, wanton, reckless negligence involved here, and on that planning commission, the gentleman that was sitting on the far left asked me if I'm considering civil action, and yes, I am. I am talking to council. But here again, we'll try to resolve this another way. And I'm open to anything y'all want to do. But 10 foot, I'm losing windows, appliances, and my animals are getting hurt. And I'm not going to put up with it no more.
Mr. Banner, when you contacted me, I contacted Hirschfield Steel and asked them to move the steel, and they did. They moved it immediately. But you've had another incident since then.
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay, so
I put up cameras in my backyard, and apparently the gentleman didn't notice that he had a whole truck full of trash bags just lobbing them in my back over my fence till one of his employees ran up hollering at him. Then he looked up and saw the cameras and drove off.
Okay, so my next question here is, if we change this line to where it matches the purple line, does that change anything? Because that's where the line will go no matter what. That will stay as a future use it comes across. So my question is, whether we change the name that's on this paper, does it change the problems that happen with the back part of your fence?
Truthfully honest, sir, I'm not sure. It's just I'm tired of getting popped by lightning. It's the steel. I have a pole in my aluminum pole going 30 feet up in my backyard that's never been touched in the 20 plus years I've been living there since I retired. Never. They put that steel next to my house 95% of the time. Y'all are more than welcome to come to my house and sit in my living room, and hopefully the steel will strike, and when you pick yourself up off the floor, you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's not funny.
So a couple months ago, they moved the steel away from the house to the exact distance you requested, at least move it another 45, 50 feet. But you've still had a strike since then, correct?
2.
Okay, so apparently that's unrelated to where the location of the steel is.
To a point, I would say yes, it just wasn't as bad. It didn't bust the windows out of my house.
Does anything happen to your neighbors' houses?
They're not happy about it, but I don't think they're not as close as I am.
John, you want to come back up, and you might want to stay, sir, while we just.
Mayor, before he goes.
I'm going to have you stay up here.
Oh, okay.
So, John, just come up, and so we have 2 people to ask questions. So go ahead, Billy.
Well, my question was, have you filed police reports or done anything when you have them on camera throwing trash in your yard?
I wanted to talk to y'all first. But as of today, if any more damage occurs to my property, yes, things will go that way.
Thank you.
John, as it relates to the ordinance, obviously that was zoned residential before, right? Single-family residential?
Yes, that's right.
So with it being single-family residential, why were we allowing it to turn into a commercial area?
Well, like I said, our enforcement is largely complaint-based, and so this was just simply an issue we were not aware of from an enforcement perspective until we got the complaint from the neighbor. And at that point, we issued notices of violation to Hirschfeld, and their remedy was to seek this zoning. If the zoning is not approved, then we would continue that enforcement action to make sure that anything in that residentially zoned area would not be used for the heavy commercial type activity or storage. It simply wouldn't be allowed in that part of the property. But when somebody seeks something like a rezoning that would resolve the issue, we suspend any enforcement activity until a final decision's made. And then, again, if it's rezoned, then that resolves the issue. If it's not rezoned, then we would pick up again on that enforcement action.
Do we have the ability to vote to approve the rezoning, but have requirements of Hirschfeld Steel in terms of what they must do on that property so that the neighbors aren't in a negative situation?
Don't at this point. Now, one thing we discussed early on was a plan development, and Hirschfeld decided against pursuing that route. One option would be to table this item. We could come back at a future meeting with a proposed plan development if that's the direction you all want to see, and that would then allow you to place conditions, either setbacks from adjacent residential with the storage. Our standard ordinance already has a 10-foot setback, as was mentioned, but if you wanted to increase that, or if a higher fence, or whatever conditions you would want to place on it, but we would have to table this and come back with a plan development instead of the straight zoning, because with straight zoning you don't have that ability to place conditions.
Yes, you may. Okay, please.
John, one question right quick while he's getting his information. What's the distance there from the purple heavy commercial to the edge that we're talking about?
That's a good question. I don't know for sure, but just looking at those lots and the sizes, I would guess that's 50, 60 feet, 70 feet, maybe something in that ballpark.
But it gets larger on the back side, so what are you, 50 up front and 100 in the back?
Right, so obviously, yeah, that distance is a little bit more, maybe up to 100. This is probably, it looks somewhere between 50, 60.
So, Mayor?
Yes, Billy?
So, John, if we do not vote to approve the rezoning, it would stay just as it is?
That's correct. It would stay residentially zoned, and then, like I said, we would pick up again on that enforcement action and ask Hirschfeld to keep any of their outdoor storage off of that part of the property.
So, the enforcement actions would be that it would have to be, that part that's zoned residential would have to retain whatever the specs are for residential properties, and we would enforce that. Or, if I understood what you said to the mayor, if we tabled it and you outlined some stipulations about the variables or whatever, the conditions, the conditional use of the land, we have that option. So right now we have kind of those, approving it, disapproving it, or tabling it.
That's right.
Okay.
And if that is the direction you end up going, I guess what I would request is that you let us know what kinds of conditions you would like to see on it, so that we kind of have an idea, and we can go back and speak with both the homeowner as well as Hirschfeld to hopefully come up with something that everybody could be happy.
When you look at that property, where do you drive into the property? Where's the gate entrance?
There's at least one gate here off of Grape Creek Road. I think it's about there. And then another one off of 30th. There currently is no entrance off of 31st. However, that's not to say that they couldn't put one there in the future.
Well, I think it'd be better not to. Just wanted to make sure there isn't
Right,
one there.
it would, but again, I don't want to give anyone the impression that because there's not one today, they couldn't put one in tomorrow if they wanted to.
So that could be a stipulation?
It could be, right.
Okay. Sir, you had some further comments?
Yes.
Thank you.
In regards to what he's referencing as variances, this is y'all's documentation, and it states because of particular physical surrounding, shape, or topographical conditions of the specific property involved, a particular hardship for the owner would result as distinguished from mere inconvenience if the strict letter were followed.
John, you want to talk about that?
It sounds like our normal variance criteria, but that's when someone, a property owner, seeks to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment for a variance from any particular zoning requirement. So I guess I'm not sure in what context the question is, but any property owner has the ability to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment and ask for a particular zoning rule not to apply to them, but they have to make a case for a particular hardship on their property, which is a fairly high burden. And in fact, it requires a 3/4 majority of the Zoning Board of Adjustment to approve any of those.
And what would be defined as hardship?
Well, ultimately, it's up to the Zoning Board of Adjustment to determine if they believe it's a hardship, but it's basically a situation where an individual property owner is impacted differently than everyone else. And so the idea is the rule should apply to everyone, but there may be circumstances where an impact on a particular property owner was unforeseen and different than everyone else, and so a variance to the particular regulation is warranted.
And the fence goes totally around the property on all 4 sides?
You know, I'm actually not 100% sure. I know that it does have on those sides, and I think maybe that shows up in some of the pictures.
I looked at the picture, but the pictures I see don't really show anything, just the home and then the fence there, but.
Well, Mayor,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
drove the property just so I could get a idea of what it looked like, and Tom, don't you say anything? He gives me a hard time because I have to go see firsthand. But the fence is all the way around the property with the exception of the entrances where it drives in off of 30th Street and off of Grape Creek Road. Because I did it a couple of times so I could see, because I guess in the complaint it said that there was a lot of trash on the property and everything, and I was looking to, without going onto their property, to see if I could see any trash, and it was clean like this, like the pictures.
All right, do I have further questions from council?
I just wanted to.
Yes, Lucy?
Aside from the dust that you have, what other problems have you been having? Like, as far as the noise, have you been experiencing the noise for a very long time?
Oh, yes, they beat on that steel, their maintenance lot over there at the 5 Point. They beat on their trailers late at night.
You gotten used to that? Did you get used to it?
I'm so
All these
tired when I
years?
get off, ma'am. I go to sleep about 8 o'clock and they're still beating on it. And every now and then you'll hear them beating on it till about midnight. But yes, in reference to your question, it was cleaned up. I have pictures of just at the time I made the complaint. It's a junkyard. They've cleaned it up and covered it up with about 4 inches of cleaching now. It looks nice now, but I have pictures to actually verify what I'm talking about. If y'all want, I've got one other thing I can state right here. That is the Health and Safety Code. And it basically says, Tom Green County is to control, stay above certain conditions would lead to neighborhood blight and detrimental to the overall health, welfare, and property and safety of the citizens of Tom Green County. That's county, but still. And they were talking about they need that lot so they can store their steel, but on the other end, they've got a fence running right through the middle with a gate in the middle that's about 20 foot wide, and they park there, but they want to park all that steel by me. Why can't they put that steel on the other end and park on the other end? Be more closer, be more convenient. They wouldn't have to navigate that fence like a circus. And I've watched them. They use 2 forklifts to pick up that steel with and move it around like it's great entertainment. But yet they have to put it by me. Put it on the other end, be more convenient. That's their excuse. They need that lot because it's convenient. Put it on the other end and all they got to do is just drive across the street.
Well, they own the property, so
They can do what they want.
they can do what they want, with the exception of the fact that obviously part of it was zoned residential and it was not managed and restricted like a residential area, but the other part certainly was zoned that way, so they had the right to do that. Now, the neighborhood part of it, they didn't have the right to do that. So, Tom, do you have?
Yeah, my question here, Mr. Banner, does 50 feet change that? I mean, the fence will always be there as it is. Okay, I mean, we're not talking about changing the fence or anything. It's just the label we're going to put on that piece of property, and they've moved the metal away. If the fact that we make a decision here today, does 50 feet of that decision make a difference? Because we asked them to move that. You and me talked, and I had them move that metal, and I said, how much further do you want it? Well, I want another 45 feet on top of what they've done, which if they were 10 feet from the fence, that makes it 55. So
Which would be the whole lot width.
of what we're talking about on the fence here. So we're trying to make this thing where it fits everybody, all right? And I'm just knowing if we really do this, does this fix the problem?
Since they've moved it away from my house, I've only lost an ice box, an air conditioner, some stereo components, but I haven't replaced the windows on my house. It lessened the impact considerably, because normally every time when they had this stuff up against the house, I replaced windows, every time. But the last 2 times it got hit, I didn't have to have any damage per se to the house. I still got damage, but it didn't damage my house. And I guess that's the biggest part right here, quit damaging my house.
But I mean, there was still some damage that happened even after we had to move what happened.
It's not as bad.
So it's not going to be any different than what we have today.
Actually, it's an improvement, yes. At least I'm not having to work on my house early in the morning or late at night to stop rain coming in.
Okay, so I don't see how that ties to this, but what I'm wanting to hear from you is if we make this change or do anything, what's happened to you since we've made these changes isn't going to be any different. The same things are still going to happen. You're still having electrical problems at your house, refrigerator, air conditioning. Now we're talking about windows. I just don't see what it solves or if it even brings to a solution to what you're looking for.
Actually, what I'm looking for is pretty much where it is right now. Just keep the steel away from my house. I can live with it where it's at right now. It's just when it's that close to the house and I pick myself up off the floor, it's not a good thing.
John, can we, may I ask a question about a potential motion? If we say the following, that we approve the new zoning, but want to require that the metal is 55 feet back from the fence, was saying that, does that require a postponement if we just say that?
Not necessarily. It wouldn't technically go to the heavy commercial zoning. What we would have to do is bring back on second reading a plan development, because that's the only way we can add conditions. But if your conditions are that simple, the reason we would typically want to table it is so we could craft those conditions and let you see the wording. But if it's simple enough that we could do it between now and second reading, then yes, we could bring that back without having to actually postpone it.
And I would suggest that we have a motion that approves the rezoning, but have the restriction that this pipe must be 55 feet back from the fence. I'm just suggesting that. Does somebody want to make that motion?
I'll make that motion, so moved, because I think we need to talk to both parties here and make sure this is going to be a long-term solution.
And if I could just clarify, I think technically what the motion would be is to rezone, instead of the CH, rezone to a planned development based on the CH district with that stipulation of the separation.
That's what I meant to say.
Okay.
I would say, could we say 55 or greater? 55 feet or a longer distance?
Yeah, we can work on some wording and bring that back to you for second reading.
If in fact that does not solve Mr. Banner's problem and something, then maybe we may need some more room to ask them to move it even further.
Well, and that leads to me to, once you go this far, if this doesn't solve it, we're talking about something totally unrelated. All right, so I'm saying this is what we're looking at as a potential solution. I mean, we've still got to talk to Hirschfield, we've got to talk to Mr. Banner as a single tenant that's having the majority of the problems and come to what's going to, but I mean, if this doesn't solve it, I don't see us throwing the rope out there and say, let's tug for more.
Well, my
that may not
concern,
be unrelated.
Yeah, my concern is, okay, so what else do they store here? Because if you take a look at it and you say, if we go beyond 50 feet, let's say, you're basically going into the part that's already zoned for this
Exactly
pipe
right.
being steel. So you
Exactly right.
can't go beyond the property line of what's already zoned. So you gotta stick with the property line that's already zoned correctly. Then the question mark becomes, well, what else is the use, or what uses beyond storage of that pipe is there? Is that the only use for that property?
No, in fact, with the straight rezoning to heavy commercial, they could do anything that's allowed on the heavy commercial. In addition to storage, it could be a
So
auto
that's-
repair facility or a bunch of other things.
So we need to do a planned development, I believe, and remember, we have to stay within the property lines in existence. You can't go into that, because it's already zoned correctly. So you're gonna pay attention to the zoning lines. So, again, we're going to ask to table this for second reading.
Well,
You
not
have-
table, but approve
and then,
with the PD, and we'll bring back the revised language for second reading.
Mayor, could I
Yes,
just throw
sure you
something else
can.
in there? I think the carport to your house is almost right up against a metal fence. So if we're talking about metal being the lightning strike cause, that may not resolve the issue. You know, the pipes that they have there may not be the issue. It may be that metal fence that's just, you know, I don't know if we
Cracking,
have
yeah.
to have a setback from a property line, a required setback, but his carport is almost right up against that fence, so a lightning could be striking that and not the pipes that's in the yard. So how do we factor that in, John?
I don't blink.
Well, Mayor, if
well,
I could.
so, yes, Michael?
I don't know enough about lighting or electrical systems in houses, but I think there used to be manufactured some kind of something that would help insulate
Well, there's lightning rods.
well, something in the nature of something that went into the electrical system for the house to help protect that system from lightning strikes. Again, I'm way out on a limb that's too thin for me, and I think if we could get an electrician to help us, there
Well,
might be something. It doesn't solve the discomfort of a lightning strike right next door, but it might protect his property from electrical surges.
Well, let me ask you a question. The fence is a steel fence, steel poles with a tin fence, is that correct? So the reality could be that the lightning's hitting the steel on the fence, not the tin, but the steel, of which is the stabilizing factor for that fence.
Mayor, may I?
Yes,
say
please.
something? I'd just like to point out that, you know, in the zoning arena, we are pretty limited in what actually we can do. We can do this PDD, and we can have him put some restrictions on the property, but there are other legal remedies that you guys have no control over, that if that doesn't solve the problem, he's already investigated, and we can only do what we can do on this situation. Really, the only thing we can do is the PDD looks like it's our best option. Any other legal remedy would have to be, you know, two property owners.
Figured out. Okay, so we are going to have a motion to approve this as a zoning change, but I'm nervous about what I'm saying, so please clarify for me what needs to be said.
Yeah, I think what I heard was that the motion would be to approve a zoning change to a plan development based on the heavy commercial zoning district, with the stipulation that the eastern 55 feet of the property adjacent to the residential zoning be limited to no outdoor storage, and I would suspect you would intend to be no heavy commercial use of that strip as well.
That sounds good. Do I have a second? Second. Do we have public comment, further public comment? Would you like to add anything else, Mr. Bennett?
It's just, all I've ever asked him to do is move the steel away from my house. That's all I've ever asked.
We're trying to work to get that in place, okay?
I thank you, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Any other public comment? With no further public comment, let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Okay, item C, first reading and public hearing of ordinances approving one, case CP 18-05, an amendment to the comprehensive plan, changing the future land use designation from neighborhood to neighborhood center, being 0.36 acres located at 320 West Avenue O.
Again, John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. You can see on the aerial photo here the subject properties. Avenue N is just a block to the north. Here's Old Knickerbocker Road and Ben Ficklin. You can see here that this property is currently in the neighborhood classification for the future land use, and it's also zoned single-family residential. But you can see here this area, everything to the north and the west is all zoned some type of commercial, and so what they're asking is to extend that commercial around those two properties. So here are a few pictures of the property. It's currently vacant. It's two platted lots, but it's effectively one large property. There are homes in the neighborhood. But again, looking back the other direction, there's commercial. So basically commercial in two directions, residential in two directions. So it's kind of in the transition area. We are recommending to go to the office commercial zoning district, which is really limited to mostly office type uses with a few small scale retail. So it wouldn't allow anything, it's not the general commercial district or heavy commercial. So it would be limited to small office type uses like you see across the street there. We did send out our notices to the surrounding property owners. We received one in favor and none in opposition. This is both a change to the future land use map in the comprehensive plan as well as a rezoning. Staff does recommend approval of both, as did the Planning Commission unanimously at their July meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Gary, would you like to start, please?
I got a few questions. We know this is supposed to be office commercial, recommended to go from RS1 to CO. Do we know what's going in there for sure?
We don't. The owner may be here. I think they are looking at different options, but at this point haven't settled on anything. And again, I'd like to remind you that when you're rezoning a property, just because an applicant tells you they want to do X doesn't mean they can't go do Y. They can really do whatever is allowed in the zoning. But the applicant may be here to answer that question.
If they are, I'd sure like to hear from them.
I'm Jesse Calloway. I'm the applicant for this. I'm looking at building office. That's it. Just need an office building.
Well, and of course, neighborhood center restricts what can be done, right, John?
Yeah, the neighborhood center future land use basically is just an indication of what types of uses or what type of zoning should be on the property. It's really the zoning that actually puts in force the regulations of what can and can't go there. But again, the office commercial district is very limited in terms of the uses.
Okay, thank you. Do I have further questions from council? Harry, further questions?
Make a comment. This certainly will enhance that particular neighborhood. I just want to make sure that we're putting something in there that doesn't interfere with the residents in that area. So I'd move to approve as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further public comment? With no further public comment, we will take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Item D, public hearing and first reading of an ordinance for the abandonment and vacation of a 25-foot wide, 0.162 acres or 7,096 square feet segment of the Ben Ficklin Road private public right-of-way in a 10-foot wide, 0.061 acres or 2,678 square feet public alley located immediately east and between lots 1 through 5 and 22 through 27 within Block 4 of the Monterey Addition. John, you're on again.
Thank you. This is as you mentioned, abandonment of both a portion of a street and an alleyway. This is Bryant right here to the left of the property, and then Avenue Z. As you can see, this area was originally platted for possible residential development into individual residential lots. The intent of the property owner is to replat that all into one large lot for commercial development. But as part of doing that, they need to get rid of the alley that runs through the middle of the property. It is just a platted alley. There's no actual alley on the ground.
And no utilities in the alley?
Well, there are, but
Okay.
they will be moving those as part of their development plan, and that's one of the conditions we've recommended in the approval recommendation. They also asked for 25 feet abandonment of the Ben Ficklin right-of-way. You'll see that we're recommending approval of that abandonment, but not the full 25 feet. The future land use is neighborhood center, and the zoning is a combination of neighborhood commercial and general commercial, heavy commercial. So the zoning is already for future commercial development. You can see here more specifically the existing rights-of-way and pavement widths on all of the surrounding streets. Avenue Z and San Jacinto are both substandard, too narrow. They will be in the platting process and be addressing that, either getting a variance to widening those streets, or they will be widening those streets as part of the replat that will happen if this abandonment's approved. Again, their original request were 25 feet abandonment off of the Ben Ficklin right-of-way. Staff is recommending a 15 feet instead, so not the full 25 feet as requested, partly for some drainage that's already in that area. It's used to have drainage that flows down in that direction. I believe the applicant's okay with that, with the 15 feet instead of the 25 feet, but that is the staff recommendation and the Planning Commission recommendation. I won't read through all of these, the rationale for approval, but staff has reviewed this, both planning staff as well as engineering and other departments, and are okay with that. There is an existing sewer line in the alley that will have to be relocated. And then, again, as I mentioned, the drainage, we would need to keep the 10 feet of the Ben Ficklin right-of-way for utility and roadway issues. We did send out notifications to the surrounding properties, did not receive any responses in favor or in opposition. Staff's recommendation, as is the Planning Commission's recommendation, is for approval with a couple of conditions. They must replat the property. That's a common condition, but that would incorporate the abandonments. They would be required at that time to relocate any utilities, as well as providing any utility easements that might be necessary for those relocations. And then the city code does provide for a fee for abandonments that they would have to pay before the abandonment becomes official as well. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Harry, do you have questions?
Certainly. I was in the Planning Commission meeting when they voted to approve of this. I want to make sure that we keep that additional 10 feet because there's already a drainage issue that goes down to San Jacinto right at Ben Ficklin. So I want to make sure that we've got some opportunity there to fix that drainage situation. But that's all. I'm good with this.
And do I have questions? Billy, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, John. You mentioned that I guess San Jacinto and
Avenue Z.
Avenue Z, those streets were substandard as far as the requirement. Yes. So the person that owns that and is requesting this are responsible for the cost of widening the street, or they would have to come forward and ask for a variance?
That's correct. So the normal requirement when they come in to plat this property as one large property, they will, and they've already agreed to widening the rights-of-way for both of those streets. The only question is how much, or if at all, they would widen the pavement. As you can see, both streets are 28 foot wide. Our standard is a minimum of 36 feet. And so they would only be responsible for their half, with the other side of the street being responsible for the other half. At this point, they've not indicated for sure whether they would ask for that variance or not, but they would either have to widen their half of the road or seek a variance from the Planning Commission when the plat moves forward.
So there would be no adverse impact on the residents that live there if they decided to widen the street?
Well, it depends. The first, it's 28 feet paved, and you say our standard's 36, so how do we have a 28 paved if the standard's 36?
Well, these roads likely were built long before our current standard was put in place.
How long has the standard been in place?
You know, I don't know for sure, at least since 2000, when the modern subdivision ordinance was put in place, but it could have been before that.
Billy, were you going to have another question?
No, but I just wondered, do we check with the residents that live there to see if there would be an adverse impact if they're widening that street?
In this case, any widening would be done on, you know, in this direction and this direction towards the property. So the few homes that exist in this area, it wouldn't be widening towards their homes.
All right, so all the widening would be done on the property owners?
On their side,
On their
correct.
side, okay. All
When
right.
you're saying that they could widen their half, but does that kick in that the city then has to do their half?
No, so for example, if we look down here, this is a vacant property as well. When or if they ever come in to develop, they would be responsible for widening the other half of the road.
But then what about on the other side where there's homes, so?
It would be similar if those properties ever redevelop. So let's say this commercial development here is successful and somebody comes in and buys all of these properties to demolish the homes and put in a commercial development, then they would be responsible for widening that part. Now, if those homes were to come in to do something, we likely wouldn't require them to do any improvements. Although if they were replatting for some reason, it would be a requirement for them. That would very likely be a case where we might support a variance to that on that side of the street.
Okay. Do I have further questions? Then do I have a motion?
Motion. Move to approve as presented by staff. That's to abandon the 10-foot alley and only give them 15 foot of right-of-way on Ben Ficklin.
Is there a second? Second. Is there a public comment, please? With no public comment, we will move to vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Item E, second reading and adoption of an ordinance deleting and replacing Chapter 10 Traffic Controls, Article 10.01 General Provisions, Section 10.01.014 Bicycle Lanes of the Code of Ordinances, City of San Angelo, Texas, providing for severability and providing for an effective date. Russell?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Just to remind everyone, currently we have an existing ordinance for bicycle lanes. They only exist on Southland Boulevard and at a very specific time, really more geared towards the school timing around the Bottom Elementary School. This proposed ordinance would establish an administrative order or adopting bicycle lanes by administrative order. All bicycle lanes would have to meet the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices and traffic laws. Would require city manager approval or his designee, and then memos sent to the city clerk, the police department, municipal court, and we would keep a record on file as well. I know some of the questions that were brought up on this last time were more specifically related to what bicycle lanes look like and what that actually means. So I brought some examples today to kind of show you what they look like. This is an actual bicycle lane in a typical residential area.
Can I have you stop right there a minute?
You bet.
So when we add a bicycle lane, is there a minimum width of a street that has to exist before a bicycle lane is added?
Correct. So what we need to have, or what we look at, is to make sure that there's that for a bicycle lane, a dedicated bicycle lane, you have to have at least a 4-foot width for a bicycle lane, 2 foot of clearance between the vehicle lane and that bicycle lane. So it's about 6 foot. So, if we had a 36-foot wide street, that would leave us, if we had basically 6 foot on either side, it's 12 foot, and that would leave us about 22 to 24 feet left for a moving lane. And that's our standard lane. Our standard lane width is about 12 feet.
Because didn't we just say our minimum our standard is 36 feet on streets?
That's correct.
Is that what
That's
you
our
said, John?
Our standard width with a 4 foot with a 4 foot sidewalk on one side of the street. So
Still
and
doesn't
without a
equal
sidewalk,
36.
we have a 40 foot. Our standard width is 40 foot wide.
I thought John said it was 36 feet wide.
36 feet wide with a 4 foot sidewalk or a 40 foot wide street. Those are our standards.
Okay, so in this case, you
But
said
that's in a
22 feet, so you couldn't do it.
That would leave us 22 feet for 2 lanes of traffic. So I would still give us a total of 36 feet wide if you add all of that together, and it still gives us plenty of room to maneuver traffic. But that's also on a local street. Typically, when we're looking at bicycle lanes, we're looking at, collectors or arterial streets, which are wider, or the standard width of those is much wider. We're typically looking at, anywhere from 50 to 60 foot wide pavement.
Could you go back to your first, that first or second slide a minute? That one. Okay, so I'm a little confused. So if I'm riding my bicycle on Southland Boulevard at 8:15 in the morning, I'm in trouble.
Well, all this designates is that you cannot park or maneuver a vehicle in the bicycle lane at those times. It doesn't negate the fact that we still have a bicycle lane.
Because I don't think people understand that. So from 7:30 to 8 a.m., a vehicle cannot veer into the right and into a bicycle lane. That's all that refers to is restriction in terms of my car being in that bicycle lane. At 8:15 a.m. in the morning, my car can be in the bicycle lane.
That's correct.
It's a little confusing. I'm sure most people don't know that.
I would agree. That's why I want to clarify this and make a bicycle lane and not just a traveling lane.
But that would create a no parking zone.
It would create
on
a no
Southland Boulevard.
That's correct.
All the time.
Correct, because it becomes a traffic issue. Because, like you said, most people don't know that there's time frames on when you can ride your bicycle in those lanes or when it's a dedicated bicycle lane. So if you leave it out the entire time.
Every resident on Southland Boulevard
Parks.
cannot have any visitors to come over to their house and park unless
That's
it's
a
in the alley.
pretty bold statement, but yes.
We can't do that.
Well, then give me some direction of where you would like to
Continue
go.
with your presentation, but no, that would be a problem.
Okay, well, this is what we have in place, so we can change it to however you want
'Cause
to
I'm not sure
make it.
where you would park if I'm coming to visit you at 8:15 in the morning, or,
Well, at 8:50, right.
understand? Okay, continue, thank you.
Okay, so this is a standard bicycle lane, okay, which is dedicated, and what this ordinance would do was, in turn, not allow parking to happen in this driving lane at any given time. This is a dedicated bicycle lane with parallel parking on the side, much like what we have on Washington Boulevard, which still allows parking, but we have now a bicycle lane here on the side, along with moving vehicular traffic.
Of course, if you're parallel parking, you're going to back into that bicycle lane in order to park.
You're going to have to travel across it. You can't.
'Cause
At that point, you're exiting the lane. You're no longer. It's not like you cannot drive down the lane.
But if I'm looking for a parking spot, I'm going to drive down that lane looking for a parking spot. So I'm sure that's probably what would happen with people.
Maybe, but then you would be violating traffic laws. I mean, regardless.
No different than if you're looking at that vehicle right there that's coming down the street. You're still going to look out to make sure that you're not impeding the traffic, either the bicycle or the vehicular traffic.
Right. So you got to.
Billy, did you have a
pull out
question?
here,
Yeah.
you still have to. If there was a car coming here or here, you still can't pull out in front of that vehicle.
No, but in order to parallel park, you're going to have to be in the bike lane in order to maneuver your car into parallel parking is my point.
Right, but at that point, you're exiting the street, and that's part of the exiting movement.
I'm sure, again, people don't know all of this. Billy?
Russell, since we were specifically looking at what the ordinance is now, and we're talking about Southland Boulevard, so I'm thinking that right there behind Sam's and Walmart, where Bonham School is and all, there is not enough room. It doesn't appear to me, let me put it that way, that there is enough room to do parallel parking, a bike lane, and two directions of traffic. So if we're looking at Southland, when you drive past Bonham School, cars are parked everywhere. And some are
During
actually
pickup
parked.
and drop off, correct?
Pardon?
During pickup and drop off?
Doing pickup and drop off. And if they're having some kind of special meeting at the school where kids are having programs, I mean, I've been through there, you know, at different times of the day, and people are parallel parked there. So they could no longer parallel park there. They have nowhere to park, and we're talking about putting a bike lane.
Well, the way it is now, there is currently a bike lane on Southland Boulevard there. So if they're parking there now, they're doing it illegally because
Yes,
it
but
would typically be during these times of school, like we have shown
do we
here.
have those signs? See, I don't think people.
There are signs out there that indicate that.
On the street?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Where do people park when they're dropping off the kids? I mean,
They park there. They're parking in the bike lane.
Right, and
I,
at that
I
moment,
think the
they're-
bike lane ends at the school.
Then that may be. It may be.
Well, I just know when I've gone past the school, I hadn't noticed those, and they're very noticeable, so I'll have to go out there and take a look, Russell. But I do know that people parallel park there.
Right, and that line backs
all
up
the way
very
down
far.
into the residential
Correct.
neighborhood.
Right there at the school, it does stop, like Michael's indicated, but once you get back into that residential area, it is a bicycle lane again.
that's because they go back up into that street. I don't know what the name is, but they go this way and then they go this way.
That turn into Bonham is maybe 20 feet from that alley separating the school to the residential area.
I think Lane is correct, that the lane stops at the alley.
Correct.
It was probably those stripes were probably installed in a Safe Routes to Schools grant program.
Well, yes, I believe that's correct.
So that
But that
kids.
doesn't stop the drop-off
It doesn't.
line from going into the bike lane.
You're right.
That's the
You're right.
problem.
Sure.
The number of cars is greater than the distance
number of
allowed that's non-bicycle lane.
Correct.
So I have a question,
Yes,
Mayor.
please, Tom.
So are we discussing where we're going to put the lanes, or we're discussing that we're going to adopt an ordinance of where we're going to put the lanes later and discuss?
We're adopting an ordinance on how we're going to administer when and where these will be installed.
Right, but
In other
right
words-
now, we're not saying we're going to put a lane on Southland or
There's
we're going to put
currently
one.
a lane on
I know there is
Southland.
one. We're not going to say we're going to put one on Chadburn. We're discussing we're going to adopt an ordinance of how to assemble these, right?
Because what we're
Correct.
trying to do is just go through the details, because last meeting, we said that it's going to go back to the city manager to approve the bike routes. Two things weren't covered in that meeting, is the bicycle routes as existing.
Okay.
There's a plan that says, here's where bicycle routes are going. Is that the plan to which the city manager can approve them? But furthermore, we need to better understand what the bicycle lane situation is here, because the Southland is a major issue from many people's perspectives. So we got to make sure we like the bike plan before we approve Daniel approving the bike lanes.
Well, and that's my question. If with the ordinance, we go to Daniel and say, Daniel, Southland's terrible. They don't go, but under the ordinance, and I think Daniel would bring things like that to us.
But it exists already. And so we need to deal with the ordinance before we deal with the authority. So do we approve an ordinance that allows these things to happen?
Mayor, and if I
Yes,
may,
please.
we're not actually, the bike plan is not up for review at this point, really. We're just talking specifically about who's going to be allowed or given the authority to do that. I would tell you that what I would include in there is that the city manager by authority, following the bicycle plan and also any plan that NPO has in place, would have to be followed in order for me to have the authority to maybe place a bicycle lane in a certain area. I think if anything, if we need to talk specifically about the bicycle plan and what we need to do to adjust it to where you're comfortable with that.
That's what we need to do, because right now, I think we all have to be in agreement that the existing bike lane story is a bike lane story we approve before we give somebody the authority to approve. So I think we need to re-review rules, regulations, and actual bike lanes as on the bike lane MPO plan.
So again, in our part, as far as moving forward, then I want to make sure the city council is comfortable with what's in the bike plan.
We need to review the bike plan, in my mind.
So we don't necessarily need to make a decision at this point. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to read that plan, and if you have any questions or if there's any changes that you propose that need to be made in order for you to be comfortable with that, we can go that route as well.
Regardless of what we do today, I think one of the things we need to do is we've got an ordinance out there right now that's not valid. We really need to make sure that if we're going to take a look at doing this thing, that we update that particular ordinance, whether we do it today or do it some other time. But that one ordinance that out there, Russell, would you go back about that slide? That doesn't mean what we do. We need to do. So we've got to make a decision whether or not we're going to take that ordinance out and replace it with a bike ordinance, which may not be the right one thing we're talking about this morning. But we've got to be able to do that.
I think there's two issues. Obviously, re-reviewing the bike lane as addressed by the MPO, and then second of all, addressing the ordinances that go along with the bike plan. So, yes, Billy, go ahead, Jen.
Exactly what this ordinance does. Right now, as Russell said, there is an ordinance out there that designates a bike lane on Southland Boulevard, and it designates these times when it essentially is in effect. As was stated, this is going to stay on the books if we do nothing today. What our ordinance does, it repeals this. It takes away the bike lane on Southland and says the city manager or his designee can decide where these things go. It may stay on Southland, it may come off of Southland based on what he decides. And the only way that the public will know is through these meetings and as it's marked on the street. But every time there's a bike lane marked on the street, there's going to be the same rules in that bike lane. Now, if you want to put language into the ordinance that we've drafted that says that the city manager's decision will be based on a bike plan adopted by council, we can certainly do that. And then it won't go into effect until that plan has been adopted.
That's what I recommend, actually.
So we can say that we want to re-review the ordinance and the bike plan before Daniel has the authority to approve.
We can write into the ordinance itself that Daniel's authority is contingent upon a bike plan approved by you guys. So he would not be able to designate, a plan is not like specifics, it's a plan. It's very general, saying this is where we think they should go. When they actually identify, yes, this is where we want to put this particular bike plan and do the stripes and do the signage, Daniel will be able to say that, yes, go ahead, as long as it's in that bigger plan.
I think we need to do that because obviously on Southland, as Lane brought up, there's people who park in front of homes. This wouldn't allow that. There's just too many complications to it that at that point in time, perhaps the school hadn't been built, perhaps a lot of things that today make it a difficult thing to manage. So,
Mayor,
yes, Billy.
I would just like to say that I want to go on record that I am not opposed to implementing bike lanes or establishing bike lanes. Correct. I support that 100%. My concern is the citizens' right to appeal or bring forth any concerns they may have prior to a bike lane going into their area, and that we would have a process whereby people could come forward and say, this won't work for me. I'm having a baby shower, or I have a daycare or something, and people park in front of parallel park. And that the street in which a bike lane is proposed would have adequate width to, accommodate the bike lane and whatever else needs to go there. So that's, that was my concern in the way I voted last time, is that we would be careful in our consideration of where bike lanes would go.
And I support that, Billy. This isn't about whether we support bike lanes. It's about the ordinance and the locations to make sure it makes sense. Right. And people having the ability to comment and come to a city council meeting and say, this is going to be a problem, or that I support it, et cetera. I truly believe citizens should have the opportunity to comment. My conversation is not about whether I like bike lanes or not, but when you look at some of this and you know what's going on out there, it doesn't make sense.
Well, Mayor, the reason I wanted to state that very clearly was because I got feedback from several citizens about why I was opposed to bike lanes. And I wanted to make it clear, I'm not opposed to having
Correct.
bike lanes in our city.
Same thing for
Same.
me. I did as
Same
well.
here.
Lane did as well. So this is not about, we'll have time for public comment in a minute, ma'am. This is not about whether we support or don't support bike lanes. We understand bike lanes are going to be part of our life. It's about the ordinance, the rules and regulations, and making sure that the public has an opportunity to voice a positive, a negative, or whatever about it. And that's, and that's what happens at city council.
And that's what I was going to also add to my presentation was that
If we didn't jump in on you.
which is perfectly fine. That's not a problem. My plan moving forward with this too is to have more public meetings regarding bicycle lanes. As these projects come up, working with Anthony and the Public Information Office to make sure we get the word out there. Not before we're about to start construction, but when we're at, maybe at 60 or 90% completed with our plans to get that implemented, and to give those folks an opportunity to express their concerns, and to also explain the difference between a dedicated bicycle lane and what we call is a shared use lane. In a shared use lane, you can still park and maneuver within that lane. It's really more of a shared use lane is more of a, hey, be aware there's bicyclists in this area or riding in this lane, as well as the moving vehicular traffic.
When was the bike plan approved?
I think John can probably answer that question a little better than I.
Off the top of my head, I don't recall the exact date, but
Date
it
and
was
time, please.
2006. I believe it was 2006, 2008, somewhere in that time frame.
Well, I think
And-
this, again, I truly believe we need to bring that bike plan forward and re-review it. A lot has changed in this city, including Bonham School and all that's going on there. I think the council has a need to review the bike plan. And I think Teresa presented us with a motion that made sense about us approving the bike plan, but we need to have that bike plan brought back forward and allow also citizens to have an input on that bike plan, if we could.
So right now, if we are voting for this, we are voting for grandfathering in Southland Boulevard of a no parking bike lane? Or is it a shared use?
I think what we want to do is, Teresa, you want to repeat what you said before?
I want to make this particular ordinance essentially become effective after you guys approve the new bike plan. It looks like the last one was approved in 2008. And from what I understand, there's already been discussions on updating that, and they're moving forward with that. So right now, it's on the ground, would stay on the ground until there's a new plan that's approved by council, and then at that point, Daniel would be able to dedicate or authorize new, or even modify, I guess, what's already on the ground.
This
So,
is
Lane,
more
it would-
conceptual. at
This
point.
today, we would not be, what we approved today is a review of the bike plan, so none of this would be, yeah, okay, got it. Okay, are there further comments?
I think I'm
Harry?
confused on what.
Why are you confused?
May I?
noticed Tom
You've got to
was
remember, this
confused
was a
over there.
4-3 vote the last time, so I want to make sure know what the motion is supposed to be.
So I would approve the ordinance with the changes that the Daniel's authorization is only to approve bike paths that are on an approved bike plan, and that the effective date becomes effective as of the approval of the next bike plan. So that right now, what's at Southland will stay what's at Southland until we get a new plan in place. And then at that point, Daniel has authority to designate no new park.
And we today actually vote to take away what's there today on Southland, and then, or not?
I think that the only way to do that would be, that would be a more difficult thing to do, because there are things and there's signs on the ground and.
Okay.
Additionally,
Say aye today,
we.
they can still park on Southland.
There's no way to say no to the Southland is what she just said, because that was
Not
my
today.
question. Can we say no to the existing Southland? And the answer is no. What we can do is approve this, make a motion to approve only after a bike plan has been re-reviewed and approved by council.
And Mayor, after that point, I
Yes.
can review this as well and,
Okay.
and propose any changes on the south.
Because I think it needs serious re-looking at. It's not current, it's not correct for today's use.
Well, we want to be careful about making those changes right before school starts. Their
Well, we
kids-
can't, because school starts this week, so there's no way to change it this week. So it, in fact, is as it is through the school opening now. Right or wrong, it is. Okay, so that motion, does everybody understand the direction that Teresa has given us in terms of the motion? Because I know I cannot repeat it correctly.
I will repeat it one more time. What we're going to make modifications to what's in your packet to limit Daniel's authority to approve the bike plans based on an approved bicycle plan by city council, and it becomes effective upon the passage of the next bike plan.
But to Billy's point, we still wouldn't have the ability for citizens, the only time the citizens could come forward and talk is when we review the bike plan, not on a case-by-case basis over the next few years.
That's correct.
So Billy, do you understand that?
I do,
Okay.
and I was given assurances that careful attention would be paid to what citizens were saying.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable with that,
Great.
yes.
With the motion as it stands, is there a second?
Second.
Do we have public comment? Ma'am, would you like to come forward? No, please come forward, because we'd love any input we could have. You want to come forward to the microphone, if you wouldn't mind?
Well, what I was gonna say is this.
Miss Suzanne, you need to.
Our neighborhoods have all changed. People used to have just one car.
Correct.
Our homes were built where garages were in the front.
Correct.
We had driveways.
Miss Suzanne. yeah.
People,
Would you give us your name? We need you.
Suzanne Daniel.
Okay.
Our neighbors, our homes were built in neighborhoods where we had garages that were either attached to our homes or they were unattached, but they were built in the front. We had driveways that exited or entered from the street. Now we have homes that are built where the garages, many of them, go from the alleyway. So there is no driveway from the front. So people park on the street. And our streets were not built wide enough. I live in Santa Rita, and you have people parked on either side of the street. You can hardly get down the street. Well, you have a bike lane, and I'm not against bike lanes either, but I can see where the problem lies. I substitute, teach, and I go out to Bonham probably 6, 7, 8 times a month. And I understand what the problem is. I go down Southland, and 4th and 5th graders are picked up in the alley. They're, right there on the side of the school. That's where they're picked up. The kindergartners and 1st graders are picked up in the front circle. And the 2nd and 3rd graders are picked up in the back circle where the buses come. And of course, every afternoon it is just chaos and pandemonium like it is at every school campus. You've got traffic. People cannot make a left turn out of there until 3:15. So everybody has to make a right turn regardless. And it's, like I say, there's not room for bicycles. And we don't have neighborhood community schools anymore, so bicycles are not very compatible anymore. We have very few kids that ride bicycles to school anymore, and it's just not, I see the bicycle lane when we come, when I come down there to school. I see it. I don't drive in the bicycle lane, but I can see a problem where if somebody wanted to stop and visit with somebody living along those streets, there's no place to park. I understand it. But, that's the changing of our lives. It's the changing of society. That's the way houses are built now. There's no place to park. There's no place to pull up in a driveway. So what are you going to do? This is just the way it is. And people like to ride bicycles. You just have that problem. So, you're going to have to accommodate the bicyclist, and you're going to have to accommodate the people that drive.
Thank you very much for your comments. Further public comment?
Morning, Council. Rocky Templin. I've been dealing with Bonham for about 10 years. Last night from 5 to 9 o'clock, there was 600 cars parked, I counted them, on the residential streets in the neighborhood. 132 of those cars were parked in no parking zone permanently. And I've contacted the police in the past about this, about issuing tickets, and they go, no, it's a school district, let's just let it be. And so also on the sidewalks, my concern is a minor collector, which is also 50 to 40 feet, and that the city manager has a right to say that there's going to be a bicycle lane there. And my residences, my homes that I'm building, have no place to park in front of their street. They're paved alleys. So now you're just saying, well, you can't park in front of your house. And I don't believe in that. And then also in the NASA FARS, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration fatality in 2016, San Angelo had, per 100,000, had 0.14 deaths for cyclists. We were ranked 127th. Abilene, which has bicycle lanes, was ranked 3rd out of this study. And so I don't know why we need it, and for sure I don't need the city manager telling me where it needs to go. It needs to be the public that has the right to decide where these go. Thank you.
Thank you, Rocky. Further public comment?
Steve Hampton, I chimed in on this last time, and I feel the same way this time, that we do not need bicycle lanes. We don't have there's no demand, there's no burden of proof showing that we do need them. There's no increased bicycle sales. The man just quoted a statistic on the deaths. So what is the need? This is a convenience for the city to put in as they see fit. So I agree with the change in ordinance, reviewing that policy, and but as far as bicycle, there is no imperative here. I thank you.
Is it possible for us to, Teresa, to say that, as you said before, to re-review the bicycle lanes, but also say that we want City Council to approve any individual bicycle lane request instead of having the city manager do it? Because I do believe citizens should, not everybody will come to a meeting about bicycle lanes. So they're only concerned when it comes to their neighborhood or their street. So I'm very concerned that we pass it and don't allow citizens an opportunity to voice their opinion as any individual bicycle lane conversation comes up.
We could definitely just change it to as approved by City Council.
That's what I would like to say.
Mayor,
If I could, but we have to change the motion.
That would not hurt my feelings, I guarantee you that. So.
It's not about you.
No, it's
It's
not.
about the citizens and the citizens' right to voice
Absolutely.
their ideas. So this isn't an anti-Daniel Valenzuela
No.
city manager. It is a pro-citizen input need. And so do we have to vote down the other one? Okay, I just want to amend it. I want to amend it to say that after review of the bicycle lanes, any bicycle lane changes, additions, whatever, must be approved by City Council and not by City Manager.
And we'll need the second to be amended as well.
Do I have a second?
No.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Good. Any further public comment on that change? With no further public comment, I will take a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed.
Oh. 4-3, motion fails. So, do we have another motion, or do we just move on to the next item?
You can go back and make the original motion.
I'm going to ask Teresa, please.
Oh, yeah, you can make another motion, like Harry indicated. Yeah, if we don't, then we can't bring it back for 6 months, and so then there's nothing you can do about the bike lanes already in existence for 6 months. So I would say the best option for you guys is to make another motion.
Do I have another motion?
I would go back to the original motion that Teresa proposed for us.
I can second that.
So we're asking to not have citizen input on bicycle lanes, changes, additions, et cetera, in this motion.
Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
The citizen participation will happen. I mean, as far as the notices that go out, we will make sure the notices go out. And this is something that I also discussed, and Billy had a lot of concern about that. I care a lot about what the citizens have to say about that. If they show up in droves and say, we don't want it here, I'm going to listen to that. I'm going to pay close attention to that. But again, I will follow whatever plan the city council does approve, and of course, make sure that we do have those public workshops or meetings to allow the citizens to have that input as well. And of course, citizens talk to y'all all the time, and y'all come and talk to me as well. So I'll make sure that we have that really good input before any type of decision is made about bike lanes.
Okay, with that, there was a motion and a second. Any public comment? I believe there was no public comment on that. Lane, did you have a question?
One thing on what Steve said of having the city manager or the departments have the authority. They have the authority to place a bike lane now, as we've seen on Oaks. Is that correct?
Correct. Based off of the
But
bicycle
no,
plan.
I don't believe that's correct. Let's get clarity. That's not a dedicated bike lane on, did you say, I'm sorry,
Oaks.
I heard College Hills.
Okay.
I don't know about
College Hills,
Oaks.
Because I don't want to vote for anything that's going to create a no parking in a residential area.
Exactly.
I agree.
Like on
That's the
Southland.
issue.
That's
It's what
Is
we're
it a-
talking about.
I
we
was
would
thinking
have to
College
look at
Hills when he
Southland
said
being
Oaks,
a
so.
dedicated shared use, and I don't know if we would have to.
We would have to
pressure
change
wash
the
it.
striping on that currently.
Okay, let's just wait a minute. One person gets to speak at a time. Russell, you want to address the issue, and then we'll let city
Can I
city
be
council
reminded what
comment.
the question is again?
The question is, does Southland Boulevard stay as it is with a shared use based off of the motion that's out there?
Currently, it is a dedicated bicycle lane with these established times. That's the way it would stand until we get an approved bicycle plan as per the motion that was made.
Tom, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I think my comment is, the public can still come to Daniel and voice their opinion, and then Daniel comes to us. I think it's a lot easier for the public to come to Daniel whenever they get an appointment than waiting to see us maybe twice a month, sometimes once a month. I don't want to take anything away from the public as far as feedback, and that's why we're here. But it's my understanding the current motion that we're on now is there's nothing restricts the public from coming to Daniel and saying, hey, there's an issue here. And, you know, I'm with y'all. There's places we don't need bike lanes. There's places we do need bike lanes.
Right.
But I want to make sure that, you know, those people know that they can still come to Daniel. We're not saying they can't come, and I think it's easier to get to Daniel when you can schedule an appointment with them than trying to get to us maybe twice or once a month.
The
Right,
number
and it would
one
also
thing-
take 2 readings to get a change done if it is amended by ordinance.
Well, the number one thing is we're going to do in this motion is review the bike lane
Correct.
by
Great.
MPO. So that's a number one issue.
Right.
And we will make sure that people have a lot of opportunity. But what we, in the big picture, we don't want to restrict parking in front of your house. I mean, this isn't going to work. So, yes,
Before
Billy.
we move on, Ms. Teresa, question. Based on the motion that's on the floor now, if someone had something that they wanted the city council to hear, could they still come and doing public comment?
Yes.
Make that comment?
Absolutely.
So that they would still have an opportunity, if they didn't like what Daniel said, to come in public comment, say to us.
Yes,
All right,
ma'am.
thank you.
Number one is re-looking at the bicycle plan that's out there. Okay, there is a motion and a second. Is there further public comment? I think I've asked this 3 times, but I just want to make sure everybody has had an opportunity to come forward and speak if they need or want. And since there is no more further public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Motion passes 5-2. Okay, thank you. Item F, update on sales tax revenue performance. And Tina, you're on.
Good morning, Mayor, Council, Mr.
Morning.
Valenzuela. We did see an increase in our sales tax revenue again in the month of August compared with the same month last year. Our August collections were $125,000 over what we had budgeted for that month, and we're over budget for revenue year-to-date, $1.4 million.
What are you going to do with all that money, Tina?
Funny, you should ask.
The good news, it's got to come back to us.
It does have to come back to you. So.
We have actually been discussing internally with staff a proposal to council to maybe use some of that money that's available for this year for some projects. And if we were to do that, of course, we would bring that back to you as a proposal and a plan.
Well, we want to make sure we have the opportunity to look at her. Obviously, the year before, the sales trend was not positive, so there were a lot of projects that were pulled and weren't maintained at the level that had originally been planned. So we want to make sure we look at the things that have been neglected from the previous year's budget that we're not able to address because of the negative trend line, as well as obviously some new issues. But we really want to address issues that a year ago were not taken care of.
We'll have a ample opportunity, Mayor, when we do our budget workshop next Tuesday as well. So we'll have a list of projects, and of course, we definitely want to hear from y'all. Y'all get to prioritize all that anyway, so.
It'll be a
we'll
long
look forward to
meeting,
it.
be
Absolutely.
prepared.
So.
Okay, thank you,
And-
Tina.
And then I just have your trend information that you like to see. This one's for the month of July, since we didn't have it available at July's meeting. Here it's just in a list and percentage form.
And that doesn't mean those
for
businesses
August.
are down, it just means the total's bigger, so it switches,
Yes, ma'am.
as you can see by this.
Just showing, yes, the previous year compared with the current year. And then for August, the same thing, so. Okay, so that's all I have for sales tax, if you don't have any questions.
Item G, consider first public hearing of the property tax rate for the city of San Angelo for the 2018 tax year. And you're on again, Tina.
All right, so as you know, you did take a record vote to keep the tax rate maintained at the .776 per $100 valuation. And so this is the public hearing that gives the public a chance to come out and make their voices heard should they want to do that.
Thank you. Do I have public comment?
Steve Hampton, you kept the tax rate the same, but we're in a time of growth, and a boom is going in the oil field. What's going to happen to real estate prices, and what's already happened? I know they've already gone up about $10,000 in some of the sales that I've heard. You're still going to get a raise. And that seems, we've had taxes for a long time. I know there's things that you've already spent the 1.5 that you just made on sales tax, but it wasn't on paying debt, I bet. We have a lot of, now if you want to keep it the same, fine, pay debt. If you don't want to pay debt, then I say you need to reduce things. Thank you.
Tina, any further public comment?
Mayor, could we
Yes,
make a
Michael.
couple of quick notes? Mr. Hampton's observation that real estate is going up is, we see the same thing. But Tina, remind me what our property tax revenue estimate increased by this year.
Our certified values that we received from the appraisal district increased by 1.6% this year.
That's a little counterintuitive for us. Average is closer to 3%. And we, Steve, we see the same things in the market, and we're thinking that we ought to be above, but we're below that average. And so we're struggling with that same thing. So as far as the budget estimates going forward, we've got to go with the 1.6, and we can't take advantage of what we see in the market this year. Maybe that will show up in next year's certified values, but we have not seen that in this year's values.
It's good to know it's only going to go up 1.6% because we all know that last year people were horrified at when they got their tax bills, property tax bills. So we need some common sense added to property tax bills because citizens should not and cannot be taxed out of their home. And so I think we need to have realism relative to increased tax, and that's why I strongly support maintaining it at last year's level. And I also know that we had 2 years of down market sales tax revenue, and I know that we have many long overdue maintenance issues that must be addressed, else they will cost us more money. So to me, I would love to reduce the tax rate, but I think we need to make up what 2 years of negative tax rates have done to our management of our assets.
Additionally, he pointed out that we had already spent the $1.4 million that we had received. That's not the case. Tina referred to bringing that to you for consideration. We are putting a list together of possibilities for you to fund. A big chunk of that is money that would not be spent, that would go to the general fund balance. So that is one of the objectives for that excess, is dedicate a piece of it to not be spent and go to reserves. But I think the three of us have been working on Rick and Tina and I have been working on a list, and we'll be getting with you on that. And if you want to move forward with something, Tina would bring it to you in the form of a budget amendment.
How many years in a row have we been at 776?
This is the 6th year. This will be the 6th year.
We need to be going down. You know, in past years, I had the West Texas mayors here last week, and Big Spring announced that they reduced their tax rate by 14 cents.
It's a topic of, our whole initiative of economic development, keeping our tax rate the same, hoping to bring it down, and how our tax appraisals are being assessed. We see people being, taxed out of their home when they increase over 2 years of $75,000 of appraisal value. That's crazy.
So we would hope that this time next year, we're looking at reducing it. No promises, no guarantees, but it'd certainly be a great conversation to have. We keep our strong economy going.
Some of those other cities do have a much stronger commercial and industrial base, and so as we increase that base, then we can look at doing,
It's been our
things like
strategy.
that. So.
Great. Thank you, Tina.
Yes, ma'am.
We will now adjourn at 10:28 a.m. for a closed session. Executive session under provision of Government Code Title V, Open Government Ethics, Subtitle A, Open Government, Chapter 551, Open Meetings, Subchapter D, exceptions to requirement that meetings be open under the following sections. A, Section 551.072, deliberations about real property regarding 1, Lot 9D, Block 2, Section 9A, Red Arroyo Hills Edition, and 2, 21.536 acres located at 2838 College Hills Boulevard. And B, Section 551.071, 1A, consult with attorney when the governmental body seeks the advice of its attorney about pending or contemplated litigation regarding Templeton Construction, Inc. And we will be gone for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, we will call the meeting back to order at 11:13 a.m. And in closed session, Lane, do you want to make an announcement, please?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the city manager to negotiate an assignment to the lease located on 21.536 acres located at 2838 College Hills Boulevard and to expand the use of the leased premises.
Second.
Any public comment? With no public comment, we will take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. We will now do item 9, follow-up and administrative issues. We just did that. Now we're going to go to B, consider approving various board nominations. For the Public Art Commission, the mayor is nominating Richard Round to an unexpired term ending April 2019. Do I have a motion for
Move to
approval?
approve.
A second? Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 7-0. And then item C, consider the schedule for city council meetings in September. I am proposing that we move the meeting from September the 4th, which is a Tuesday, to September the 6th, which is the Thursday of that week. Do I have any other suggestions?
Going to Vegas? Vegas?
I'm going to Wisconsin.
The issue will be if we don't do it that week, then we're going to have 2 back-to-back weeks. And we have to have a certain amount of time frame between approval of the budget and a second reading of the budget before October 1, right? So the issue is trying to figure out that out in the schedule. Ken? All right, we're going to, there's a motion to approve September the 6th as a Thursday for the council meeting instead of the 4th. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. And we know Lucy won't be here. She can ask us questions. Okay. All right, with that, do we have announcements and consideration of future agenda items?
I've got one, Mayor.
Yes, please.
I'd like to tee it up and put on public record. I'd like to tee up the potential for open discussions as far as looking at long-term using, not taking out of our budget, but using something maybe out of our savings or profit that we've got off sales tax as a committee for the development and, say, future study, feasibility study of venues that pertain to the Coliseum, event centers, as far as things that would relevantly affect economic impact is what we have and are sitting at. And Michael, I don't know if I'm using the right phrase here, but I'm talking about assessment of the convention center, assessment of the grounds at the rodeo, potential for a new event center. I think we have to tee that up formally for somebody to say, okay, let's look at what it would actually take to do a study for somebody, as much as I hate doing studies, for somebody to come in and say, this is the next 50 years or 60 years, because what we're looking at is something like that. But I don't want it to be a huge taxing item. I don't know, Rick, if you've got a suggestion.
I guess this is keying off the discussion as well from last time about potential, looking at ways to keep people heads in beds, those kind of things. If right now we know we're full, we talked about this last time. So I guess that's what you're keying on, is how do we strategize for our facilities that it provides for that, whatever those are, whether they're the Coliseum or the Convention Center or whatever.
Right, and I don't know the exact process to tee that up, but I think the mayor has set in on some discussions that people have talked about, and also within the rodeo as far as looking at event centers, and that pertains to bigger scope than just some things.
This is a little like the mayor's questions about.
We're going to hold off a minute. I got too many people talking at the same time, and I don't know what's going on. So please go right ahead, Tom.
This is a little like the mayor's discussion about a water treatment plant, where we at in the process. This needs to move forward as council directs. So I'm thinking a discussion at a council meeting about what process council would like to follow, either creation of a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee to discuss the issue, or delegation of that to the Civic Events Board, or go straight to some sort of study where an expert is hired. Rick?
Right, but I think what Tom is getting at is, as we've talked about, looking at, as the mayor pointed out, projects that we may want to focus on, whether or not there should be some dollars allocated toward that. So we'll just look at that. We'll try to bring that, I guess, to y'all, as the mayor's pointed out. We need to prioritize as we look at these things. And so we can bring those to you as options as you look at the budget and those dollars that Tina talked about a while ago.
Okay, so right now, you're going to bring forward things that we know are specific issues with the facilities, and prioritizing money towards those issues on the $1,400,000 and some $1,000 that's out there.
Well, I think Rick is working on that type of list. I think this could end up on that list, but also this has a possibility of being funded out of occupancy tax revenues. Or excess occupancy tax revenues, if there's a fund balance there. We know there is a fund balance there.
That's where it needs to stay.
Really, the funding, there are a couple of options. The main thing is, how does council want it to move forward? Does council want to have the discussion all themselves? Do they want to delegate the discussion and study to someone else to work and then bring back to council? The key is, if council wants to move forward on it, how do you want it to move?
I think from a clarification standpoint, Tom made a mention, this is not something that we're planning on doing next week or even next year. This could be a long-term plan, but we've got to figure out what we want to do so that we know what it's going to cost. And that may be inclusive of the water treatment plant, wastewater plant, facilities, all of those things that we think we want to do. So it may be one of those things that
Some of that's in the CIP plan already. So the question mark is outside the CIP plan. First of all, let's understand that the $1.4 million in excess sales tax should be spent towards existing properties, not this. If there is excess money in the hot tax fund to address issues that hot tax fund benefits from, then that's a separate issue, but that's separate than the $1.4 million in sales tax revenue. Let's keep those clean.
If it's acceptable, what we'll do, I think the Civic Events Board has discussed this in the past. It's been a while. So we'll resurface it in that group with a recommendation that would then come to council. And typically they're looking at, as you said, the hot dollars and so forth, but they could resurface a recommendation that then we bring to council for discussion, and we'll do it that way.
Because that's one of the things we brought up at the last council meeting was that we need to relook at those hot tax funds because, in fact, for example, right now, the CVB is limited to X amount of dollars regardless of how many more dollars are in that. That's why we talked about limiting the civic events or cultural affairs group to 5%, a set balance, a set number, not the 5%. And the same thing with the civic events group is a set number, not whatever's out there. And that way, the city council can then prioritize what that money needs to spend on to bring our facilities up to the needed level.
It's just a proposal to start implementing and look at that program and bring us suggestions.
But part of that, Rick, should be also what you and I and Sid has talked about before is as we bring in more concerts and events to these places, we should be taking a portion of that and setting it back to help redo whatever facility, whatever needs to be done in these facilities. So I think we need to make it's a combination of hot dollars and those additional dollars that we're bringing in of these events.
We can look at that topic in relation to what the mayor's talking about in relation to the budget pertaining specifically to civic events.
If we limit the budgets to dollars amount, not percent amount, then we should have money left to prioritize towards facilities, improvements, et cetera. Okay, any further announcements? If not, I'll take an adjournment motion. Oh, yes, sir?
Mayor,
yes.
related to the meeting on that we've moved to the 6th, Tom Green County, I've just been made aware, Tom Green County Appraisal District has published a public notice that we would hold our hearing on the 4th. And we are bound by that under state law, as I understand, so we will have to have that meeting on the 4th. Mm-hmm. It could be limited only to that discussion, though.
Ryan, can I repeat so I see if I understand? The 4th would move ahead as a public hearing only on the tax rate. The rest of the city business would be done on the Thursday.
Well, you might as well do it all.
If
Do
we're
it
gonna
all
be
at
here,
once.
Two meetings.
We're going to meet.
Yeah, if we're
Do
gonna
whatever council's pleasure is.
Well,
really.
you're not giving us an option on the meeting on the 4th, so I don't think anybody wants to meet twice that week. So I think if, in fact, we have to be obligated to that, sorry we are, then that's when the meeting is.
On the 4th.
So is it on the 4th? I'd like to put it back on my calendar where it's supposed to be.
It will be on the 4th, and so that's really all. Just consensus of council that's.
Lucy, you're back on.
We're not voting to do it. We're being told we're going to do it. Let's be clear here.
Wow.
I move we adjourn, Mayor.
Motion to adjourn a second. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. We are adjourned.